Now let's start going through all of the different tools in Photoshop that you're going to be using going forward. As we have discussed before, tools over here, there are multiple tools, and with each of these tools, there are specific options that do come up in this bar, which we call the options bar. As we navigate through each one of these tools, we'll see how to use it for a simple use, and we'll see what are few options that we can also see along with it. The first and the most basic one is the move tool. Now with the move tool, you can see a couple of options over here. Currently, I have only one layer. Let me add another layer. Now over here, I have two layers on my screen in my canvas. I can move each one of these layers independently. Now checking it from the options, there's something called auto select or single layer. Now I can auto select a layer or probably a group. We'll understand what a layer group is, but if I turn this off, I won't be able to click and drag the layer that I'm clicking on. Instead, it will move the layer that has been selected in the layers panel. So over here, I have tent, which has been selected, and that's why when I click and drag over here, the tent layer moves and not the parent one. If I had to move the parent one, you can guess what I would have had to do. Click on parent and then move that layer. It is especially handy when there are a lot of images in front of you and you'd want to move one specific one. Let me turn that back on. There's something for transform controls. For every layer that has been selected, Photoshop directly showcases me a transform option so that I can click and drag. The other thing that is visible over here is show transform controls. With this, I can change or transform any image as I want to directly with the move tool. If I do that, however, I will get into the transform mode, for which I need to commit to this transform before I make this happen. Let me cancel this for now. Then there are a couple of other tools. If I select multiple layers, now I can organize them, I can align them or distribute them as necessary. There are a few options for align, distribute and distribute spacing. I can also choose to align the layers based on the selections or on the canvas. There's also something for 3D. These are very simple tools for 3D, which is for moving, scaling up the canvas, and we'll use it if we ever get to 3D. Now, moving on to the next tool is, if I click and hold on this, I can see the artboard tool. Artboard tool is basically used to create multiple artboards. If I create artboard over here, it's of this size, and then I can add another artboard towards the right side, in which I can have the next set of layers. Artboard lets me create multiple boards in my canvas, and I can play with each one of them as and when I wish. Let me go back to the original version with no artboards, just one canvas and one artboard, which is basically no artboard. Then the next set of tool is the Marquee tool. Now for Marquee, there are a couple of options for Marquee tool as well: rectangular, elliptical, single row and single column. The Marquee tool lets me select a particular area according to a shape that has been predefined. Now I can do that. If I hold shift, I will be able to create a proportionate shape. So very similarly, I can do the same thing with elliptical Marquee tool as well. If I click and drag without pressing shift, it lets me create an ellipse. But if I hold shift, it ends up creating a circle. We'll learn about more shortcuts of using these tools in a later course. Let's quickly go through the options over here. The first set of options is to select if there is any preset that has been defined for the current tool. The next set of options is for adding on or removing from selections, or even interact or even intersect with the selection. The basic setting is of course the new selection. If I click on add to selection, if you can take a wild guess what it will do, it will add to the selection that I already have. If I click on add selection over here, it basically selects both these things together. Similarly, if I click on subtract, I can remove from selection a certain area. Let's say this entire bit. And that's how I've removed. I can also do something for intersect, which is from the area which has already been selected. If I click and drag another area, the area that is intersecting, that is common between both the selections is the one that's going to get selected. And you can look at that like this. Right? So that's for selection. There's something for feather that basically means I should be able to decrease or increase the sharpness of my selection. The lower the feather, the higher the sharpness. I can also set a specific ratio or a specific size for making a selection. The style that has been selected up till now was normal. Let me do this. Let me create a fixed ratio and let's say 16 bit and 9 height. This is generally a format that is used for most of the 1080p videos. You can see even without pressing shift, I'm able to click and drag and the selection is being made in a 16:9 ratio. Now you can assume what happens if I click on fixed size. It gives me options to do a very specific pixel by pixel selection. It says pixels over here, but I can also change this to centimeter and this will still work. Basically, every unit that Photoshop understands can be added over here. Of course, going in terms of centimeters, the size of the document is way too big, and that's why it ends up selecting the entire image. If I was to do this with, let's say, 6 centimeters or 4 centimeters, let's do 4 by 3 centimeters, and that's it. That's what you see when you're doing a 4 by 3 selection. Now with this, I don't need to drag, because the moment I drag, I end up shifting that layer or shifting that selection where I'm dragging, where I can just click and create a selection. There's also something for select and mask, which is something that we'll go into greater detail in a later chapter. Very similar to the Marquee selection tool, there's something called Lasso. This Lasso tool lets you just drag randomly and create a selection. Not bad. I can also do this. There's something called Polygonal Lasso tool, which lets me, instead of dragging, create lines from one point to the other so that I can create a polygon with multiple straight lines. Now this is particularly useful if I have some very straightforward lines and some very straightforward edges where I need to make a selection. And if I click on the starting point, it gives me an option with a small circle towards the end of the tool that explains that the selection is going to get closed over here. With that, I've created a selection. Now with both of these options, with Lasso or Polygonal Lasso tool, the options bar is very similar as what we have seen in the previous ones. Neo selection, add to selection, subtract, and intersect with selection. I can also create a feather. Because these are not custom specific sizes, you do not see the options of fixed ratio or fixed sizes when the selection is being made. Now, as I said, it's okay to use Lasso or Polygonal Lasso tool, but what happens if you have something which is not as straightforward? Magnetic Lasso tool snaps the selection area to the closest difference point in the pixels. If you can see this very clearly, I am just clicking and dragging and the tool is snapping off to the closest edge that is a difference from the background. This is a very early age version of how selections were made, and with that I've created a sort of selection and I'm closing this at the initial or the starting point. If I see that circle right there, that's the circle, and I click on that, and that's how the selection has been made. And with this, I can move that selection as and when necessary. Of course, I do see there are few issues over here that basically showcases how the feathers have not been covered. Let me zoom in a little. And actually before that, let me close the layer behind and focus only on this. You can see how the selection is not appropriate over here. I can click on add to selection and create this selection like this. Create a point over here by clicking and then move back and probably close over here. And that's how I've been able to select that small set of hair, that side. And that's how you use magnetic lasso tool. Another version of the same thing is this magic wand tool selects an area based on the color. Very similar to the lasso tool, but the magic wand tool lets me select colors which are not continuous with each other as well. You can see that from the options over here. There's something for sample size, which is what color is selected, what is the tolerance, or basically what is the closest sort of range when I'm sampling or when I'm selecting a certain color. There's something for anti-alias, which is basically a selection for smoothing out selections. Contiguous, or if you can rephrase it, it can call continuous pixels. Something for sampling all layers. We'll probably not use this. And there's something called select subject, which is a new feature that has been devised in the later or in the latest Photoshop versions. Let me show you how a magic wand tool works. If I deselect everything and I click on, let's say we just want to select the beak over here. If you click on beak, the selection that has been made is basically, you can see very close to the yellow pixels that have been clicked. Now you can imagine if I increase the tolerance, let's bump it up to 82 and I do the same selection over here again. The tolerance is way higher and it's able to select a couple of other colors also from the beak. Now I've selected this as continuous. If I don't select that contiguous, probably you would be able to see how yellows that are visible over here and in the eye might get selected. So let's do that. If I click on this yellow over here, you can see how this yellow has also been selected. Turn on contiguous, I can increase the tolerance somewhat more. The highest value that it goes up to is 255. And if I click on that, it basically means every color that is matching the area. So that selects almost 95% of my visual. You can see how most of this layer has been selected. If you can see marching ants over here, which basically indicates the selection as well. And that's something about the magic wand tool. There's also something called quick selection, which is similar to this, but I can select on certain layers, click and drag, and it makes the selection. Now these three tools that we've just went through, the Marquee, Lasso, and magic wand or quick selection, these are all used to select layers or select content from my layer or on my image. This is something that I'm not really fond of Photoshop. Photoshop has never been able to club a lot of different tools together. In certain cases it does, but it has not been the greatest at it. Most set of things that it has done is clubbed a few very similar tools together. But then if I move on to the next set of tools, which is crop tool, you'd be able to see that, of course, the basic option is to select an area that we can crop. We've already seen this in our previous lessons. I will be able to select an area and crop the entire image basis that selection. I also have few other options over here that I can select, click and drag, or I can move the particular ratio, or I can select a predefined ratio for selection as well. It could be 1:1, 4:5, 5:7, 2:3, 16:9. There are a few which are already been defined, and there are very specific pixel-based selections as well, which can be used. I can also set the size very simply by typing out the pixels over here. And with that, I have made an exact selection. Now I can move that selection as I want. There's also something for straightening. Click on this option. You can use to create a line. And with that, it will end up straightening or making sure that the line matches the horizon. Let me show that one more time. If I click on straighten, and for this time, let's create a very tilted line, assuming that it would straighten basis this. If I let it go, you see how the layer has been tilted to make sure that that line that I just put out there was horizontal to the surface. There are a couple of other options for crop, which is to delete crop pixels or to fill the background as and when necessary. I can do generative expand. This is something which has been brought up in the 2023 version of Photoshop. There's something that has been always available, that was content aware fill, which assumes the content that was there and creates something based on that. Let me cancel that, go back and get that image back to work with. Now, as I said, these set of tools are not really matching with each other. This is a crop tool that you'll probably use once in a while. There's also something for perspective crop. There's something called slice, which breaks one image into different segments. This is specifically useful for web designers when they're creating or they're bringing out certain images into smaller parts that can be used for their design purposes.